The funeral was over, but my terror had just begun. The message, "I'm alive, don't trust our sons," was a toxic seed planted in the fertile ground of my grief. I looked at Charles, my oldest, the one who looked so much like his father, and the suspicion felt like a physical pain. Henry, ever the shadow of his brother, seemed equally rehearsed in his sorrow. They insisted I rest. They brought me soup. They talked about Ernest's peaceful passing. But their words were hollow, like the casket in the ground. That first night alone was the longest in my 66 years. This house, once filled with Ernest's quiet strength, now felt like a stage for a monstrous conspiracy. My husband, who had been my steady refuge for 42 years, was suddenly both gone and somehow alive. The two people I raised, sacrificed for, and loved unconditionally were now suspects in my mind. I started with the money. It always starts with money when greed enters the house. Charles and Henry had been unnaturally focused on Ernest's life insurance. They spoke of it with the cold efficiency of businessmen, not grieving sons. I remembered Charles mentioning the policy covered $150,000, a figure he shouldn't have known so precisely unless he had been intimately involved in the arrangements. I had to be careful. If the message was real, they're watching, then my life was in danger. I couldn't trust anyone, not even the people who brought me my morning coffee. I felt a surge of energy, a fierce protective instinct replacing my grief. My love for Ernest had not died. It had transformed into a raw desire for justice. I was no longer a grieving widow. I was a detective fighting for the truth of the man I loved. My first step, the bank. I needed to see the paper trail, the evidence of the greed that had poisoned my family. The next morning, dressed simply and pretending to be numb with grief, I drove to the Spring Creek Savings Bank. Mrs. Thompson, the manager, who knew Ernest and I from decades of simple transactions, gave me a sorrowful hug. I requested the statements for the last 6 months. What I saw wasn't subtle. It was a clear pattern of financial bleeding. Large, irregular cash withdrawals had been made. $1,000 here, $3,000 there, $4,000 just last month. This was money Ernest and I had saved for our simple retirement. Money we cherished because it was earned honestly. "Who authorized these, Mrs. Thompson?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. The manager explained that Ernest had come in person, claiming the money was for shop repairs. Shop repairs that never happened, as I had seen when I went to his garage. I asked to see the withdrawal slips. The signature was Ernest's, but it was shaky, unsure, a stark contrast to his normally firm script. It was the signature of an old, tired man, perhaps one who couldn't see the numbers clearly. And that's exactly what Charles had exploited. Mrs. Thompson then dropped the second bomb. "I think Charles was with him once or twice. He said he was helping his dad with the paperwork because Ernest had trouble reading documents without his glasses." My blood ran cold. Ernest never took his glasses off. He saw the world through them. This wasn't assistance. It was manipulation. My own son, Charles, the ambitious one, had deliberately isolated his father, convincing the bank manager that his loving son was merely helping his frail father. It was a perfect cover for systematic theft. Back in the car, I felt a wave of nausea, a realization that transcended mere theft. If they were willing to steal money using deception, what else were they capable of doing to secure their inheritance? The mysterious text message was right. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Ernest he needed more protection for you. It was a trap. This was the third piece of evidence, linking the theft directly to the motive for murder. That afternoon, I returned to the metal box where Ernest kept our essential documents. I pulled out the life insurance policy. It confirmed Charles's strange interest. Just 6 months ago, the policy had been renewed and drastically increased from a mere $5,000 to $50,000. This was a flashing red light. Ernest was frugal. He never spent money unnecessarily. Why the sudden need for $50,000 of coverage? And then I found the second policy, the workers' comp. An additional $50,000 purchased just 2 months before his death, covering accidental death on the job. 2 policies, $100,000 in total, directly linked to 2 people who desperately wanted us out of the house. The total amount was $150,000, a life-changing fortune for them, a sum that could justify the evil plan that was now chillingly clear in my mind. They hadn't just murdered him for the money. They had set the financial trap first, ensuring the reward was worth the risk. It was no longer suspicion. It was certainty. Charles and Henry, my boys, were responsible for their father's death. The grief was quickly being replaced by a cold, surgical rage. I needed the final proof, the motive, and the modus operandi. The anonymous messenger was right. Go to Ernest's shop. Look in his desk. There are things you didn't see. I went back to the shop, no longer looking for grief, but for contradictions. Charles had told me a machine had exploded, but the shop was immaculate, too clean. There were no burn marks, no debris, no signs of the catastrophic explosion that should have left Ernest with severe burns. Everything was in its place, clean, oiled, and running perfectly. The explosion was a lie, a carefully constructed alibi to cover up the real cause of his death. In his dusty wooden desk, I found what I knew I would: Ernest's own suspicions, notes scribbled in his handwriting. Charles insists I need more insurance. He says it's for Margot, but something doesn't feel right. I don't trust his intentions. Ernest, my sweet, honest Ernest, had seen the darkness before it consumed him. Then I found the sealed envelope addressed to me. His last words: "My dearest Margot, if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. Don't trust anyone blindly, not even our sons." He had known, and they had silenced him before he could speak. The next step was the most dangerous: the police station. I walked in, asked for the report on Ernest's accident, and Sergeant O'Connell, a man who knew Ernest from years of fishing stories, looked at me with confusion. "What accident, Mrs. Hayes? We don't have any report of an explosion at Ernest's shop here." My breath caught in my throat. I pressed him, citing the hospital. He checked again, his face turning grim. "Mrs. Hayes, your husband arrived at the hospital unconscious, with symptoms of poisoning. Methanol. A deadly, silent killer. The full truth crashed down on me. MURDER. They had poisoned him, lied to me, lied to the police, and then claimed confidentiality, citing my emotional fragility, to keep the poisoning a secret. The funeral was a rushed farce, a cover-up for a cold-blooded crime. I returned home, no longer a widow, but the chief investigator in my husband's murder case. The rage was cold, precise, and focused. I had to expose them, but I couldn't go to the police yet. I needed more than a report. I needed the final confession. The unknown messenger had become my silent partner, my conscience. I suspected who it might be. Someone who knew Ernest's secrets, someone outside the inner circle of my sons. But for now, their anonymity was my greatest weapon against Charles and Henry. My plan began with deception, mirroring their own greed. I had to make them comfortable, confident, and careless. I started by calling Charles. "Charles, I've thought about what you said. You were right about the house. I'm ready to sell. I'm too old to deal with all this alone." His reaction was exactly what I expected. Feigned sadness mixed with barely concealed triumph. "Oh, Mom, that's such a relief. Henry and I were worried about you. We'll handle everything. You just rest. And the insurance money," I continued. "I want you to manage it for me, just like you suggested. You and Henry are the smart ones with money. You can triple it, right?" That word, triple, was the final bait. The thought of controlling $150,000 was intoxicating to their greed. Henry and Charles arrived the next day, bringing fake legal papers about the house sale. They spoke about liquidity, investments, and returns, words that meant nothing to me but everything to them. I listened patiently, nodding, pretending to be the frail, trusting old woman they thought I was. The trap. I told them I wanted to celebrate their new business partnership. I want to make Ernest's favorite meatloaf and mashed potatoes. It's what he always ate when we had a major family discussion. They accepted immediately, their eyes already calculating the value of my home. The dinner was set for Saturday. This time, I wouldn't be the victim. I was the one setting the table for justice. Saturday evening arrived, quiet and tense, just like the evening before Ernest's death. The aroma of meatloaf filled the air, a cruel, familiar comfort. Charles and Henry arrived early, their suits crisp, their smiles wide and fake. They were happy. They thought they had won. "Mom, this smells just like the good old days," Charles said, taking a greedy breath. "You really shouldn't sell this place. It has too many memories." His attempt at sentimentality was laughable, considering he was selling the memories himself. I served the meal. Meatloaf and mashed potatoes, just like Ernest liked. I made sure to use the same water pitcher Henry had brought the day before, which he claimed was a gift. As they ate, I began the conversation. "I was thinking about Dad. It was so sudden, that explosion." Charles stopped chewing. "Don't dwell on it, Mom. It was a tragic accident. It happens." "Yes, but I went to the police," I said softly, watching their expressions. Henry's hand, lifting a forkful of mashed potatoes, froze midair. "You went to the police?" Henry asked, his voice suddenly thick. "Why would you do that, Mom? We told you it was an accident. You were too emotional to go. Sergeant O'Connell didn't have a report for an explosion," I continued, pushing the meatloaf away from my plate. "He said he had a report for poisoning. Methanol." The silence was deafening. Charles' face went white. Henry dropped his fork with a clatter. Their masks had finally shattered. Mom, you don't know what you're talking about," Charles stammered, frantically wiping his mouth with a napkin. "The doctor said it was an infection from the burns. The doctor also told the immediate family that I was too fragile to know the technical details," I interrupted, my voice rising in cold fury. "You and Henry hid the police report. You invented the explosion. You murdered your father for insurance money. We did it for you," Henry screamed, standing up abruptly, knocking over his chair. "We did it so you wouldn't be a burden anymore. That old house, that shop. You were holding us back, Mom. We needed the money to live the life we earned. You earned." I stood up too, looking down at my sons with eyes that held 4 decades of betrayed love. "You earned nothing but a death sentence, Henry." The moment Henry confessed, I pressed the small button hidden beneath the table. "We didn't kill him, Mom?" Charles desperately tried to recover the situation, but it was too late. He saw the fire in my eyes and knew his deception was over. "You poisoned him with methanol," I stated. "You gave it to him in his daily coffee, slowly, until it caused irreversible brain damage, just like the doctors described." "We just wanted him to be sick," Henry sobbed, covering his face. "So he'd retire, the insurance would pay for his care, and we could manage the money." "But the damage was too great, wasn't it?" I asked. "It wasn't enough to just make him sick. You needed him gone for the $100,000 accidental death policies to pay out. The policy was increased after Jasmine pushed you to sell the house," I continued. "She was the one who pushed you to be someone important, even if it meant becoming a monster." "She didn't know anything," Charles yelled, trying to protect his wife. "Oh, she knew," I replied calmly. "She's the one who contacted the bank to confirm your father's frailty and signed the confidentiality agreement with the hospital to cover up the poisoning." Then, a knock on the door. It was Sergeant O'Connell, the officer I had visited yesterday. "Mrs. Hayes, you called?" he asked, looking at the scene. The overturned chair, the hysterical sons, the cold food, and me, standing firm, my heart hard as stone. "Yes, Sergeant," I said, gesturing toward the recording device I had just retrieved. "I think you need to hear this confession. It confirms your report. My husband, Ernest Hayes, was murdered by his two sons, Charles and Henry, for life insurance money. Charles and Henry were arrested that night, their expensive suits a bitter contrast to the handcuffs. Jasmine was arrested an hour later on accessory charges. Sergeant O'Connell stayed until the early morning hours, gathering evidence. He explained that Ernest's body had been cremated immediately after the short funeral Charles arranged. However, the hospital still had blood samples taken upon his admission, which confirmed the methanol poisoning. The police also quickly discovered the numerous financial transactions and the fraudulent policy increases. As for the mysterious message, the sergeant smiled. "Mrs. Hayes, it turns out Ernest was a smart man. He saw the signs." The messenger was Doris, my neighbor and confidant. Ernest had seen the increased insurance policies and Henry's strange persistence, and he had confided his fears in Doris. He had asked her to keep his phone and send those messages if he didn't return from the shop on time. "He knew he was in danger, Margot," Doris told me later, crying. "He said if anything happened, the only person he trusted was you, and that you'd need a push to look beyond your love for the boys." Ernest was alive in the love and trust he had placed in his best friend. The trial was a blur of legal jargon, evidence, and heartbreaking testimony. In the end, Charles and Henry were sentenced to life imprisonment for murder and fraud. Jasmine received a lengthy sentence for her involvement. I didn't get the insurance money. I donated the full $100,000 to a foundation that helps elderly victims of financial abuse. It was money tainted by blood, and I couldn't bear to touch it. I kept the old house, the one they wanted to sell. I reopened Ernest's shop, keeping it running with the help of a young apprentice. I am still Margot Hayes, 66 years old, but I am no longer a grieving widow. I am a survivor, a protector of the truth, and a testament to the power of a mother's love. A love that was strong enough to face the ultimate betrayal and demand justice. The court case took a slow, agonizing 2 years, but justice, though delayed, was served. During the trial, Charles and Henry tried everything. They claimed Ernest was mentally unstable, that the money was for his investment ideas, and that I was the one who was too fragile to understand reality. They tried to turn the court against me, against the lonely old woman who had dared to uncover their crime. But the evidence was relentless. The bank statements with Ernest's shaky, manipulated signature, the hospital's methanol report, the increased insurance policies, and, most damning of all, the secret recording from that dinner table confession, Henry's desperate scream, "We did it so you wouldn't be a burden anymore," echoed in the courtroom, a devastating indictment not just of murder, but of the ultimate family betrayal. They received life sentences, and Jasmine, who played her part in the financial cover-up and manipulation, was also imprisoned for conspiracy and accessory to murder. I did not attend the sentencing. I couldn't bear to look at the faces of the 2 boys I had raised, now etched with the grim reality of their choices. The next challenge wasn't the law. It was the quiet war, the war against silence and solitude that settled over my old house. Doris, my brave friend, explained Ernest's plan to me in detail. He had suspected something was wrong, not necessarily murder, but a deep-seated financial scheme. He had asked her to keep his spare, untraceable phone and monitor his shop routine. When the 3rd day passed and Ernest hadn't shown up at the shop, Doris initiated the prearranged alert. The message, "I'm alive, don't trust our sons," was Ernest's last testament of love, a push for me to wake up and defend myself. Ernest was not in the coffin, but his legacy was. He lived on in the courage he instilled in me, the courage to fight the monstrous evil his own sons had become. I chose to keep the old house, the one they called a burden and a relic. It was not a burden. It was a fortress of memory and a testament to the life Ernest and I built with honest hands. I used the tainted $100,000 life insurance money to establish the Ernest Hayes Foundation for Elder Protection, dedicated to helping older citizens fight financial abuse and fraud, especially from family members. I couldn't use the money, but I could transform its terrible origin into a force for good. The old house felt different now. The roof still leaked occasionally, but now every sound was a reminder of freedom, not suspicion. I reopened Ernest's old bicycle repair shop. It wasn't about the money. It was about honoring his memory and his simple, honest life. I hired a young man named Tommy, a college student who reminded me of Ernest when he was young. Shy, earnest, and good with his hands. He loved the smell of oil and grease, just like my husband. I started holding weekly porch talks, simple gatherings with Doris and other neighbors. We would share stories, both sad and triumphant, about life, love, and the struggles of growing old. It was a community Ernest would have loved. Intimate, honest, and full of genuine connection. I am no longer the frail, naive woman my sons thought they could manipulate and dispose of. The pain of the betrayal remains, a scar on my soul, but it no longer defines me. It has hardened me, turning my love into a shield against darkness. I still sit on the porch every evening, drinking coffee. I look at the stars, and I talk to Ernest. I tell him about the foundation, about Tommy, about the stories shared on our porch. I know he is listening. I learned a profound truth. The greatest legacy a person leaves behind is not the money they accumulate, but the love and trust they inspire. And sometimes true family isn't blood. It's the friend, the neighbor, or the memory of a loving husband who risks everything to give you one last warning. The final crucial message: always trust your instincts, especially when the betrayal is cloaked in care.